The most successful people in the world all have one thing in common. They've learned how to think big by developing a perspective of possibility. And the good news is, we all have the potential to apply the same strategies to achieve amazing things in our work and lives. Hi, I'm Rob Hartnett, and as your Chief Possibility Officer and host, I'm here to inspire you to become the star of your world as a person of possibility, through learning how people from all areas of life are thinking big and chasing down their dreams. Let's hear from a person of possibility right now. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and others, to the latest episode of the It's All Possible podcast. Today, we're speaking with a longtime friend of mine who's made a career out of sailing. And he's been sailing with some of the most incredible sailors, racing on some of the most amazing yachts, and along the way, competing in 2 Olympics, winning multiple world championships, becoming an international sailing coach, and still remaining humble. Would you please make welcome Andrew Palfrey, or Dog, as he's known. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it's great to be here with you, mate. Yeah, I'm all well, thanks. Just sitting over here in Cowes in the UK. But no, thanks for the nice intro.
Now, mate, you're going to tell me, you and I, we sailed a little bit together in Melbourne, and now you're in Cowes on the Isle of Wight. Tell me how that happened.
Look, it's probably more a matter of why I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's really just to do with work, you know, and following the work, and why Cowes? Oh, it's where my wife grew up. But you know, we met.
That's a good reason.
Yeah, so many of my friends in this sort of, if you want to call it a line of business, are in that sort of mode where you travel for work and you end up living where your partner is most happy, you know, most comfortable, bringing up kids and probably around family, that sort of thing. So that's how I ended up here. But the journey from Melbourne was really one of following the sport. Really, yeah, we were knocking around together in the 90s in Melbourne, and
that's the 1990s, everybody. I'll just plug that point.
and obviously that's where I grew up, and you know, then moved to Sydney in the early 2000s to follow an Olympic sailing dream with Iain Murray, and lived there for 10 years. And then when I kind of, you know, retired, so to speak, from Olympic sailing, basically all the work or a vast majority of the work that actually pays more is in the Northern Hemisphere. And I spent 2009, the year after I retired from Olympic sailing, doing, I think I did 13 trips that year, 3 days per trip, you know, a day and a half to get to the place and a day and a half to get home. And it's about 40 days traveling in a year when you've got 3 little kids at home, and you permanently exhausted, you know. So the next year, 2010, we thought, let's give the Northern Hemisphere a go just for summer and come back to Australia for the Aussie summer. But we got here to Cowes as a starting point, and my wife loved it, and we never left. And I'm super happy here. I really like it. Home to me is wherever the family is, and yeah, you know, I do miss Australia in some ways, but in other ways, it's nice to visit there, and I do visit quite often. But I love living on this quiet little island.
Yeah. Now, tell me though, when you did the Olympics, and you must have been almost sailing out, if you know what I mean, after those campaigns. You were sailing with Iain Murray, one of our great legends. When was the choice though to say, I'm going to make this a profession? Like, I'm actually going to do this as a paid living, as opposed to sailing and competing, but actually going, you know what, this is going to be my profession. How did that come out of that in your mind?
Probably like, you know, it really just evolved, Rob. You know, I mean, what do they say? There's 3 types of people. There's people that make stuff happen. There's people that watch stuff happen. And there's people like me that stand there thinking, what happened?
What happened?
No,
but Cowes.
Seriously, look, I think I was passionate about boats, passionate about sailboat racing. I was never really into cruising. you know, it was all about racing, and just allowing myself to follow that passion, you know, and always being drawn to boats. And I think, like anyone, as you look back on your career, Rob, is there's always a couple of, well, for me anyway, there was certainly a couple of sliding doors moments, and where I you know, what one for me, I was, you know, I went out of, you know, Caulfield Tech School for the great and the gifted, you know, into an apprenticeship. You know, I was a tradesman, and I was working on a shop floor. I was quite good at that. Won an Apprentice of the Year award in Victoria, and then moved into the office, and moving into the, you know, production office and wearing a tie to work was a really big deal to me. It was, you know, it was all, I guess I was someone that was always looking, you know,
Right. So you felt like you'd
where
made
I
it
could go.
to do that. Yeah.
And that was a really big deal. And I'd done that for a couple of years, and someone asked me to go to a Worlds in around the time we were knocking around together. It was in Canada, and that was a huge moment in my life. You know, I mean, here we are growing up in Melbourne at that time too, before the internet and so on and so forth, very isolated, having a great time, but very isolated, and seeing another part of the world, and was huge. And I went back to work, and the people that I would look up to and respect and admire and want to be them in, you know, 5 or 10 years' time, I actually looked at with completely different eyes, you know, completely different perspective. And instead of looking at them with admiration of what they'd achieved through their career, where they'd gotten to, and the company car they had, and the this and that, I'd actually look at them and think, bloody hell, you're really old. I'm about probably 40, you know.
That's right.
That's right. And you're still here, you know.
Yes. Yes.
And so that was massive. And then another big one was I think getting asked to do an Olympic campaign. And that was at a fairly low point, I think, in my journey, whereby I was in the marine industry and had gotten pretty burnt out with basically selling stuff, you know, selling boats to people, selling sailing boat parts to people, selling sails to people. And it had gone away from the actual sport and the competition. And I distinctly remember going to to the first World Championships in the Solin class, as it was back then. I got invited to do a campaign for the Sydney Olympics, and all of a sudden, here I am with two other guys. It's us against the world. You're in, and there's no excuses. You know, you are. It's one of the most elite competitions in the world, and you're just trying to be the best you can be, and you're not trying to sell anything to anyone. You know, it was.
Well, you're selling this. You've already sold it to yourself, right? So, and the three of you
exactly.
are aligned where you're going, and there's no, you know, they're committed, and you've, especially on a soling, because I've only sailed them a couple of times, but you know, you've got to be committed. You're hanging on the side of one of those things.
Exactly.
You're committed and you're aligned, aren't you? And it must have been such a lift to go. It's an interesting point you make, because I've spoken to a lot of Olympians and even AFL footballers and NRL players who try to go to the corporate world after their elite sport, and not many make it. Right? There's actually not a lot make it, because they just can't work out why everyone's not at the same level or passionate as they are. But you were kind of flipping it the other way, whereas you've done a bit of the corporate work, and you got into you're into commercial work, and then you've seen this, you've got exposed at the highest level, the elite level, as you mentioned. It must have been mind blowing.
You know, and Rob, I was fortunate. Actually, just to rewind a little bit, and I could probably speak for you in this way too, in that, you know, as we were growing up, I was sort of obsessed with the America's Cup, this event, the America's Cup, you know, and you know, reading magazines about it and following it, and the heroes and the stories is littered with amazing characters and fantastic stories. And then, you know, luckily for me, at my time of life, and I'm sure the same for you, 1983 happened, and Australia 2 won the America's Cup, and for me, I was 16 years old, and at school, and it was again, you know, a huge thing, and became a massive aspiration for me to go and
Yes.
get involved in this thing, the America's Cup, and
Yeah.
trying to somehow navigate a way and find a way to be able to do that, you know, became a massive driving force as well. And probably just the only other thing I'd say is I've been fortunate in that through my journey through this sport, professional sailing has grown. It wasn't really a thing when we're in the 80s, let's say. You
That's
know,
true. I think it's a great point you make because certainly in Australia, and there's a couple of things, I'll point out for the listeners, which you and I know, but I think the America's Cup you're right. You speak about the America's Cup for me and you because, John Birchin was the guy who ran the local North Loft. I mean, we saw him on regular events at Brighton or at Blackberry or whether there's a major regatta on. John was there and he ran this local loft. So he wasn't a guy that we sort of saw from afar. He was actually up close and personal, and he was this guy and this team of people that we could get close to. That when they did win, it actually was really, I felt really meaningful. You kind of really felt like it was we were part of it as a cohort of people. So I think that's a really interesting part when you say that, how you got to feel that and say I want to be kind of part of it. But I remember I did the J24 Worlds in 1986 in Newport, Rhode Island, and that's where I discovered professional sailing. And I remember talking to, I think it was Jim Brady at the time, and I said, Jim, what do you do? And I was like, I was going to work for KPMG in Australia, right, the accounting firm. And Jim goes, hey man, you should come work for us. And I go, what, as an accountant? And he goes, no. He said, no, professional sailor. And I said, what do you do? And he goes, oh, I sail yachts. And like, I sail yachts and sell sails. And then I go sailing and I said, do you make him? He goes, oh, I wouldn't make a sail, right? He goes, I just take them out. And I suddenly found out there was this whole network because America was so big. It was so huge. The Canadian market, the American market was so massive. I hadn't even got to Europe at that point. But there was, and it kind of really just the whole light bulb went up for me that, wow, that's this whole career, whole thing. Whereas over here, it was more, kind of a hobby in a way, or kind of there's a few people involved, but it wasn't an industry.
Yeah. I mean, here much more, you joined the industry. You joined the industry and it was a bit more of a lifestyle thing, and it gave you the opportunity to go sailing more. If you were selling sails or making sails, well, it all speaks to reason that you're going to go and sail on the boat to help sell your product and so on. And that's sort of the way it worked. But actually owners or teams paying people to sail was not really a thing until probably more so into the late 90s, I guess. It became more mainstream, and so, as I say, I've been fortunate in that way that the professional side opened up, and then also that coaching became more accepted in the sport, and there was more and more demand for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Let's talk about a few things. One of the points you made earlier, I was watching a podcast you did, I think last year sometime, but you made a really interesting point. You said that sailing is a preparation sport, and I thought that was really interesting. Tell us, what's your insight? What do you mean by that when you say sailing is a preparation sport?
Yeah, I guess in general, I'm a believer that most sailing results are predetermined to a large extent. In sailing is a sport where we do have a heavy sort of influence of Mother Nature with the wind and the waves and the wind shifts, and there's more wind on one side of the course than the other, and so on. So there's an element of I won't even call it luck, but there's an element that's always an element that you sort of buy into when you sort of get into the sport. But the preparation, is key. And in my world, it's not only kind of boat preparation and equipment preparation, but it's sort of understanding your boat. It's understanding what's under the water and what's up in the air, how it works, cause and effect, what changing one thing can make to another thing. Understanding the setup, a little bit of that sort of 10,000 hours thing, of just it becoming quite instinctive. And then, the physical side, and I'm a great believer in that for sailing. And for me, it's for me, it's being physically able to do your job on a boat, and there's on bigger boats, there's very physical roles and there's non-physical roles. However, the non-physical roles are quite mental, and if you're not physically well, if you haven't slept well, if your nutrition's not good, if you drank too much the night before, your bandwidth's going to be all chewed up. You're not going to be able to do your job well. But in the more physical roles, it's being fit enough to do your job, but then importantly, strong enough to avoid injury.
Yes.
So the specific muscles, and fit enough to recover. So at the end of a 5-day regatta, you're feeling sharp. You're feeling good physically, which then enables the mind to be sharp and positive and getting along well with people. And, all these sort of things are massively important and have a direct impact on results. But
yeah, that's a good point. I like the physical side. That's a really interesting point you made, just picking you up on that one. You talked about the physical side being so important, because if it's not, it takes away from the mental aspect. It takes away from the ability to communicate, that you get stressed, that type of thing.
And like Victor Kovalenko, who is a famous sailing coach, most successful Olympic sailing coach of all time, Ukrainian, who moved to Australia to work in the Olympic scene here, and had already won a bunch of medals, but for Australia I think it's 6 gold medals he's won in the 470 class. Yeah. So I was super fortunate that early in my coaching career, I was sort of teamed up with Victor. He took a great interest in us in the Starboat with Iain Murray and I, and he became somewhat of a mentor to me. And I learned so much from him, but one of his sort of anecdotes was that sailing's not a sport, it's a game. It was, what do you mean by that, Victor? He says, it's a game played with the mind. It's like chess. It's a decision-making sport. There's a move, you've got to adapt to that move, and so on and so forth. And that rang true with me, that there is a large physical element to it, but at the end of the day, it's a decision-making sport. It really is, and the sharper we are, the more comfortable and confident we are. It just frees up bandwidth, and we're making good decisions.
Yeah, which is why your physical side,
on the right thing at the right time.
Right, which is why the physical side is so important, to be able to have that not be in the way of being able to play that game to your optimal way.
That's it. And so much of it comes down to preparation, like you say. And in our sport, location preparation. Doing your homework on a location, understanding how the currents work. I live in Cowes now. The Solent just down the road here is, we get up to 3 knots of current and back eddies and so on. So understanding the location, it might be a geographical wind shifts and so on. And, so that's all part of it as well. And then you're just your daily prep. Like I say, your sleep, your nutrition, is a hotel room in a good spot? Is it quiet? And so on and so forth. And then your daily routine, just like you see, watching a fair bit of cricket on the laptop, this Aussie summer sort of thing over here, and you just see the level of preparation these guys go through, the batsmen and the bowlers and their routine, it's quite interesting to watch. So and we're the same.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember reading when I was saying lasers. I remember Ed Baird wrote an article on winning a world championship, which he won. And he made this point about, he literally spent, I reckon, half the article talking about getting the right accommodation and how important that was for sleep, for recovery, to be able to get away. And it was amazing. Like you're expecting hot tips on where to sheet, on the downwind leg, and he was like talking about his pillow, right? At the time I was going, okay, I got the pillow, but I needed more. But actually, in hindsight, as I got older, it was a really smart article. And the other person who I think took this to a new level was the American John Bertrand, and who now he came across. And I remember he was always a bit of a hero as well through Laser Days. I remember seeing him, I was at Sandringham Yacht Club, and I said to him, John, I got to ask you, was it true that you did like 3 years of jazz ballet to get good at laser sailing, but you got so good at jazz ballet they actually asked you to perform on stage, right? And I always thought it was urban myth. It wasn't. He
Really?
actually
Wow.
was that
Yeah.
good, but he didn't do it to perform on stage. He declined, but he actually got asked. He was that good at doing it just to get, because he felt that was the closest physical
Yeah.
thing he could train with other people in a routine to get good for
Yes.
laser, so the brain and the mental part could just ignore what was going on physically. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There you go. Yep.
let's talk about some other people though, because I'm really interested. You've had this unique situation where you've sailed with, with you talk about John Bertrand, who won the America's Cup in 1983. You've sailed with John, you sailed with Iain Murray, you've sailed with Peter Morton, you've sailed with Peter Duncan, you've sailed with some of the really great leaders, great world champions. I'm wondering if there's like two or three things that they've all got in common, maybe more, but from your observation of sailing with these people over many years, what do they say two or three things they all do or they're all passionate about?
Yeah, Rob, you're right. I have been really, really fortunate to sail with, not only childhood heroes, um, and then people like, so childhood heroes in the form of John and Iain, but then really, really sort of resourceful and clever people who have forged amazing lives and careers in Peter Duncan and Peter Morton. And I'm proud to say that the latter two for sure started off as clients, and have become very, very good friends, good mates, sort of people I really value having time with over a coffee or a beer or a meal, and so that's super nice. But as far as common traits, they do have common traits, and I say, particularly in the case of John and the two Peters, they foster an enjoyable environment. That's really
Mm,
important to them. And I know in John's case, and John and I are great mates these days. I always catch up with him when I'm in Melbourne. He comes and stays with us here in Cowes every year. He's got a couple of kids in this part of the world who've got their own families and stuff. So yeah, it's a super nice relationship, and I really value. And John was a big mentor to me when I started sailing with him when I finished my Olympic days in the sort of 2009 onwards for about 5 or 6 years in the Etchells class. And John is a big one on setting an environment, a performance environment, a culture of and it's a winning culture, but it doesn't start with that. It
right.
starts from a much lower base of enjoying time with each other, respecting each other. And he had a phrase of the culture. He wants to set a culture where 1+1 = 3, i.e., put two people together, and the output is greater than what 100%, 100%.
Yes.
The output's 300%,
Yeah.
because of the collaboration. And uh, so each of those three guys are like that. And I think another thing is that and so this enjoyable atmosphere or is sort of, to me, it's based around what we do, when we're racing these sailboats in a very competitive environment. It's not always fun, when we're not sort of telling gags all the way around the
Sure.
racetrack.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sort of approached with a large element of seriousness, but it's really enjoyable. So there's
Right.
fun and there's enjoyment.
Yeah.
There's a challenge, enjoying that challenge, embracing it, and that's
Right.
and that really comes from respect, never giving up, all those good character traits, that we sort of, everyone talks about or you read about, but they're all involved in that. And it starts with respect, and it's a beer at the end of the day, and it's a so on and so forth, and enjoying time with each other, because you'll face some adversity. And if you don't enjoy it, if there's not that base level of enjoyment, and this is a real big thing in Olympic
Right.
campaigning, I think, is that you know, if you've got 2 people or 3 people on a boat that kind of don't get along, if it's not successful, or if success starts to die away, it's tough, you know,
Yes.
because you just don't have that foundation
Yeah.
to sort of rest on, that sort of, you know, the enjoyment. So another thing is, I think in all successful teams that I've been involved in, there's a real alignment of goals to reality. And what I mean by that is, you know, a local club sailor or someone that's just taken up the sport, if he gets in touch with me and says, I want to win the worlds next year, and you ask a few questions, and you know, if in my mind it's unrealistic, given the time input, time's always the biggest one. Obviously, there's money, there's you know, other resources, and the mindset and so on. If they're not in alignment with the goal, it's going to be a tough gig, you know. And so that's important, I think. They prepare well in advance. They involve good people. That's probably the first thing, Rob, is it probably starts there. You know, it's all about people.
Right.
You know, it's which is, you'll solve everything if you've got the right people. You solve all the technical issues
Yes.
and so on,
Yeah.
if you've got the right people.
So it's a great point you make, and it's probably a common one, I think, as I've noticed, you know, doing this, you know, this podcast especially. But there's a great quote from Clint Eastwood, and they actually said to him, "Yeah, Clint, what makes a great movie?" And he goes, "Oh, that's really simple. It's the cast." He said, "You spend 90% of your time on the casting.
Mm,
The
mm,
movie will almost make itself because you're united in the passion to make something really outstanding. And you might challenge each other, you might push each other, you might argue, but you're doing it because you've got a common goal of making an outstanding product." But he said, if you get the casting wrong, it's uphill all the way.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
very similar,
totally.
isn't it?
Yeah, very similar. You know, that, and as I say, I should have started with the people. You know,
That's the
and how.
foundation, though, isn't it? I mean, I think that's
Mm,
really interesting for you because you know you're operating with good people pretty much 90% of your time now, where it becomes almost how it is. But the reality is, you peel it back, you realise that actually the base is getting the right people around that you can have that kind of conversation with, that do enjoy each other's
mm,
company. I think that's a really great point. Yeah, have fun, but also, but you're all going towards the one place, and I think that's I'd summarize what you said is really interesting. I think that, you know, the Peters and, you know, John, we talked about, they're intentional about fostering that culture. Like, they're not waiting for it to
mm,
happen. They're not looking for
mm.
magic. They're actually intentional about getting the base right before they start building. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and it's sort of it over the years, Rob, it has astounded me that in sport, in our sport, sailing, you see some incredibly successful business people that come into it, and don't apply that same set of, you know,
We
whatever it
never have.
is,
Yeah, yeah,
the values or the methodology
yeah,
into their sailing campaign. You
yeah.
know, the boat looks crap. You know, things are breaking all the time. The inexperienced people,
Right.
blah blah blah, blah, you know, and all the economics is out of whack. You know, so it's brand new sales, which costs tens of thousands of dollars,
Mm,
but no sort of sailors at the level that are going to extract anything like the performance out of those sales.
right.
Things are out of balance, you know,
Yep.
and yeah, I mean, you do see it all the time, which is, as I say, it's astounding to me.
You talked also about life and sailing, and you talked about that when you face those real challenges, and to be good at something, you've got to almost suck at it first. Like, tell me about that. You sort of talked about the fact that you can't really be good at something unless you're prepared to fail at it first, or prepared to learn. You don't just come straight in at being good. And some people get frustrated with that. But having the mindset that actually failing is all right, as long as you're failing forward.
It's a great question, Rob. You know, I might start off there with an anecdote of something I came across recently, coaching some people, and we were trying a new thing, a new setting, that was a little outside of the box, and it didn't work, which is fine. I mean, it's the things sometimes don't work because of another reason, and it can lead to, like, sailing, and in the America's Cup in particular is filled with stories where teams happened upon something accidentally almost. They weren't looking for that, but it was an outcome of something else they were trying, and boom, they're like a big jump in performance that ended up being really, really fundamental to a win, And I'm a big believer in, I like developing. I like trying stuff and pushing forward, and it's hard, but it is hard work, and it's not for the faint-hearted, because you've got to be prepared to go backwards.
Right.
And that can be tough, and you can be out there with your tuning partner, or you can go to a regatta where you say to yourself and to your crew, look, the result of this one doesn't matter. What we're doing is we're trying this technique or this piece of equipment, or this setup. But halfway through the regatta, if you're getting your butt kicked, it can be difficult. And for some people, it's really difficult. And I had to advise these people I was working with that, look, honestly, I don't think this development path is right for you. You go pretty well with your normal settings. You feel comfortable with those. If it's going to be like super emotional every time you don't win a test, or you don't win a race, or you don't, I'd suggest let's not head down that path, because it's not going to be very enjoyable, and you're not going to get the best out of yourselves. I mean, that's just one anecdote, but Rob, for me, I would say I'm a late bloomer, in that I didn't start Olympic campaigning until I was over 30. You look at Olympic programs now, that they're lucky to be sort of the early 20s,
Yes.
And I went to an Olympic Games as a 41-year-old, and I was sailing with Iain Murray, who was 50,
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's all come through sort of graft and passion and learning. And I'm a great believer, and have over the years really become obsessed with fact over opinion, as you know, and I'm sure it's the same with any walk of life or any sport, that there's the yacht club bar is the height of all sort of pontification of fact, but I've become obsessed with finding facts. What actually happens when you change this setting, and how does it alter other settings? So in that sense, data of more recent years has become very important in just separating the fact from fiction. And in that way, then it leads you to better decisions on anything, on techniques or equipment, or
100%.
which side of the course is paying, or, and that's, And I think, just, I've been lucky, Robin, in that it's never felt like work. I have never done this for money. We all need money to live and survive and pay our mortgage and bring up the kids, but I don't do it for money. It's not something that drives me. And just recently, I guess Sunday morning, and my wife said, what are you doing? What are you doing today? And I said, I'm just going to get in the boatyard actually for a little while and dick around with boats,
Yeah.
And which is my kind of living, But,
yes.
And she said, oh, okay. If we won the lottery last night, what would you have done today? And I did think about it seriously. I gave it a bit of time, and I said, you know what? I think I'll just go down the boatyard and dick around with boats.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just over here, you'll notice this if you pick up on it. But just over here, we've got the American artist Chris Isaacs touring in Australia next year, right? They did an interview with him, and there's Chris in Nashville with his guitar, right? And he's
Yeah,
just
there you
tinkering
go.
away. And
Yeah,
I've seen interviews. I remember with Slash from Guns N' Roses, and he came to the interview with the guitar because that's what he
yeah,
does. And
yeah.
that to him has
That's
not
very
worked.
cool.
And he just said, "Let me just play this for you." And he's just tinkering, and and he might discover something, he might try something, but it's like him on his day off, we'll tinker with this or go to the studio. We'll go and play with that. We'll go and do something a little bit different. And when you're passionate about something, it just, you don't have to be paid for it, right? And I mean, it's great if you get paid for it, which is even better. But it is, I think, when you discover that kind of passion or that real genuine interest, it's not really like work. And that's why I think when you do that, you give yourself permission to fail at it because you want to develop. And I think you had a great point, which I think is not, you should give yourself credit for it because not everyone does it, which is, I love developing. Like I love developing, which by its nature means I'm going to fail and I'm going to learn from that. And not
Mm,
everyone can do that. And in fact, it's interesting. I was talking to Adrian Finglas. I've just released his podcast as we're doing this one. But one of the
great.
points he made was coaching youth in today. He said it's very different than when Mike Fletcher was coaching him as youth. And he said Fletcher would leave him for a couple of months and go, right, Adrian, I want you to try this, try that, and I'll come back in 2 months' time. I'll come back up to Brisbane and see how you've gone. Adrian
Mm,
said today, the kids he's coaching are on TikTok going, righto, I should be able to master this,
mm.
by this afternoon? And I'll just do a selfie and show. It's like, hang on a second. And you talked about this time, this preparation. But he said a lot of the young ones, he has to drill in them saying, it's okay if you don't get it right this weekend. If you don't win the Opti Nationals or the States,
Yeah,
just don't believe. And there's a lot of social media pressure now. And he's had to jump on
yeah,
it. Like he's on TikTok and a whole bunch of other ones. He said, just so I can be with them. I get what they're doing now. But there's this young ones, the Gen Alphas, the Gen Z, Gen Alpha, have this preparation thing. It's like, I did it. I prepared. I'm here now, right? World Championship. Where is
That's
it?
really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah. And I don't know if that's going to slow down, but he said that's one of his greatest challenges is telling him, just letting him know, hey, it takes time. It takes time,
yes,
and
yes.
by all means, use it all. The other great one you reminded me of on data, you talked about data. It's a great quote I'll give you from a venture capitalist called Jim Barksdale. And he's got this great quote. His quote is this. He said, if we've got data, let's use data. But if all we have is opinions, let's go with mine because I put more money in. It's right.
I like it.
It's a
I
great
like
quote.
it.
And what he's saying to his team
It's a
is,
great
give
quote.
me the data. Because if we don't have it, and you all think you got opinions, I got a bigger one, right? So
Yeah,
it's
that's
a
it.
really
I like
nice
it.
one. I'm sure you and I can think of some boat owners like that till we
Yeah,
go.
no,
We're going to do
there's
it.
an often used quote from some buddies of mine where Terry Hutchinson was wanting to do something a particular way, and as a famous navigator, Juan Villa, was pretty set on his way, and he ended up saying to Terry in his Spanish accent, ended up saying to Terry, "Well, Terry, we could do it your way, but then we'd both be wrong."
What a nice way! What a nice way of putting it. And you got to
Anyways,
work on the
yeah,
Spanish accent because I think that could work for you. That line. But
yeah,
hey,
yeah.
we talk about
You
Terry
can see I put a lot
Hutchison.
of effort into that.
We're talking about Terry Hutchison. I had a question about on TP52s, and because he's been doing it for ages. I think they're kind of like the form, or in a way, they're kind of Formula One of a lot of racing at the moment. You've been doing some coaching of TP52s. What do you think about the TP52 or the 52 Super Series and all that's going on?
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic area of the sport. I think it's for sure for the last few years and currently the sort of the highest end monohull racing in the world. It's quite unique in that technically it's definitely restrained and held back. And I think the rule makers have learned over the years that if there aren't constraints, like similar to what you see in Formula One, obviously, and there aren't cost controls, it'll just fall apart, and we've seen that in sailing. We've seen various areas of sailing and classes over the years just fall apart because it became a checkbook warfare,
Right.
and the enjoyment wasn't there for the people paying the bills, So it's and so as a result, it's quite refined and you're up against the ceiling of what the rules allow you to do. You're up against the performance ceiling, if you like. there are very refined and quite small changes through the years where a naval architect or a sail designer or a rig designer finds something, but because there's such a level of analysis and coaching for each team, it pretty quickly discovered what
Right.
that, someone will go out and have
Yeah.
a great regatta and there'll be, a fine tooth comb through pictures and video and data and so on as to what the difference was. And, there's a lot of that sort of, that all the shore crews talking to each other, they all know what's going on with equipment and so on.
Yes.
So it's very even. The boats are they're not one design. So the naval architect has a free hand, but they've all ended up in the same corner, if you like, of the rule. So the boats are all fairly similar, and the racing's amazing. It's so tight.
It's so close, isn't it? It's incredible.
Yeah, and it's pretty well covered on a fairly lowish sort of budget, but they do a good job putting it out there. Video and commentary and stuff. But from a coaching perspective for me, it's quite interesting in that it's a big group of people, a big group of full professional sailors, of huge experience, and it's one of those things that's not super physical. There's definitely non-physical roles on board, generally filled by really experienced, very much renowned, sailors.
Yeah.
And however, the teams are led and in most cases steered by time poor people. Who are generally the least experienced sailor on the boat, and that is, and they're in general they're the owner, and it's their boat, they're going to drive, which is great, and there's a category for that, which is the largest category, and so from a coaching perspective, you have to create or be part of creating an environment that is getting the best out of the driver. And
with small amount of time
in essence is the weakest link. So that is a challenge. It's an enjoyable challenge, but that's really where the challenge lies in most cases.
Yeah. And tell us about the 5.5 metre class. Not a big class in Australia, but compared to what Etchells were and the like. But you've had tremendous success with the 5.5s, and you also did I'd like to talk a little bit about this campaign you did. I think it was with Peter Morton, where you built a kind of new boat. You built it locally, and in many ways, I think it got a lot of the community through the pandemic that was building that boat. Was that fair to say that? Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience? Because it wasn't meant to be like that, but it,
it's very cool actually. And this probably to rewind a bit. In about 2010, I was actually did the Etchells Worlds in Ireland with John Bertrand and Tom Slingsby, and Tom he wasn't the global sailing superstar he is today. He was, a fresh-faced, ginger-headed kid from the Central Coast of New South Wales who had been through a pretty tough Olympic Games in 2008, where he was the favourite and finished worse than mid-fleet. And he was working his way back again towards the London Games, where he ultimately was successful. And I had gotten him involved on with John in our Etchells campaign, and we did a couple of years together. Fantastic, won a lot of regattas. Anyway, we won that Worlds, and then the following week I went to the 5.5 Worlds, filling in for a Swiss friend of mine. First time I'd ever seen or sailed the boats. It was on Lake Garda, amazing place, amazing scenery, and so on and so forth. And that was a Worlds, and we won that. I felt comfortable in the boat. It's very similar to an Etchells.
What a great week!
Like sort of stuff. It's the rig. The rigs are different, but similar, and it's a boat. We're racing a boat, and so on and so forth. And I taught them how to swear in Australian and all that sort of stuff. We had a fun week.
It's your duty.
And actually Tom subsequently that same week, the week after the Etchells, went and won the Laser Worlds down the road here in Hayling Island, so it was a cool time. But fast forward a few years, my friend Peter Morton had bought a 5.5, and he called me and said, "You've sailed these things, haven't you? And would you like to become involved?" And so, yeah, absolutely, Morty. Let's go and do it. And we went to a regatta in Lake Garda, and in this boat he bought, which is about a 15-year-old boat, it hadn't seen a lot of maintenance, but we worked on it. We got it looking pretty good, and we won this regatta. Boom, fantastic. We had a great third crew, a English fella from the Finn class by the name of Ben Cornish, and Morty really got the bug, and I couldn't do a lot more that year. They went off and did the Worlds, I think, in Helsinki. Good, enjoyed it, and then I did the Worlds with Morty just before the pandemic in Sydney, and we got a decent result in an old boat. We came fourth. We were unlucky not to be on the podium. Probably were not going to win in that piece of equipment. The boat it's a development class. Our boat was about a foot shorter than the boat that won.
Okay.
The keel was about maybe 200 mils shorter in chord length. There's room to play in that class, and it's a great rule in that, basically if you target light airs, let's say a little bit like the 12 meters that JB and the guys won in 83. If you target light airs, more sail area, and you'll end up with slightly more displacement and so on, but it's good for light airs. It'll be bad in heavy airs. So you get nothing for nothing, no free lunch. So anyway, Morty definitely had the bug at this stage, and he decided he wanted a new boat so we could compete, and we didn't walk away with that excuse of we didn't have the equipment. And Morty being Morty, he's a guy, he runs, he's run all sorts of companies in his life, but one of the things he's still got going on now is he builds the ferries that transport people, high-speed ferries, and the ferries we go from Southampton to the Isle of Wight. He built those. But a company down the road here employs one of the biggest employers on the Isle of Wight, makes ferries. That's the sort of guy Morty is, and he decided to build his own design. There'd been nothing other than the Swiss design for the last, the Swiss builder for the last 20 years. And the builder, which I'd won a Worlds with, actually, the lovely fella, Christoph Wilkie. So we undertook to build a boat. So we had to have it designed and so on. And we talk about assembling people, and Morty is the master at that. And I'd said it was like a mini America's Cup, and in that way, what I mean by that is there's a group of like high performing, high achieving people within the sport, within their area of the sport, naval architect, boat building, mast building, carbon fiber, sail designer, sail making, sailors, and Morty grouped all these people together from the outset. And it was the group was headed up by a guy called Tom Schnackenberg, who's Morty's best mate, and who was the sail designer for Australia 2 in America's Cup in 1983. So there's a nice sort of loop that's closing. And he also ran Team New Zealand for many years, the technical side of Team New Zealand for many years. So an absolute lovely guy, an absolute legend of our sport. And he's that was super inspiring to have Tom involved, and with Morty as well, in choosing the naval architect, all these naval architects have successes and failures. It's what we said before. It's all about, that's part of the journey, part of the development process. So Morty undertook to get CFD analysis involved, and so that was done for us, by a company in Sydney, Steve Quigley.
So just explain CFD.
Yeah, so essentially what it is, computational fluid dynamics, and essentially what it is sailing the boat in the computer. If
Yeah.
you know, so there's a model of the boat, and it sails along at given heel angles, at given speeds,
Right.
through a highly refined set of computer models, and the output, I guess, really is a drag number,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
And the lower the drag, the better performance of
Yes.
the boat. And it's gotten so refined. I mean, it's been used in Formula One now for many years as well,
Right.
and it's very, very accurate. And so that takes some of the guesswork away. So we went through that process. Morty used a friend of his, a very designing naval architect who's also a very good sailor, Steve Quigley of Sydney. And yeah, so very, very cool. And we then had the pandemic, and but it was very cool. You know, we had this thing going on that was exercising that we were able to have, and me in particular as the sort of project manager, able to invest a whole lot of creative focus into through that period.
Yeah.
And I remember actually that period, I was hooked into your podcasts as well, and your
Right.
newsletter and so on. And it was,
Yeah.
that was very cool, that outlook.
Yeah. Thank you.
Really positive outlook.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, we ended up building 3 boats,
Wow.
not just one.
Yeah.
And we've won the
And they were all
world's.
built in the Isle of Wight. They were built
They
locally?
were, yeah. And again, this is the sort of character Morty is we were building a boat. You know, we pulled the trigger on this boat before the pandemic. It took time to run the CFD, to design, to finalize the designs, get a plug machined, get the molding made, basically, and then get the molds back here and start making a boat. So it's several months. But at the same time, there was a builder, another boat builder in Cowes, who was pretty quiet, and it was actually the Etchells builder here.
Right.
And Morty said, well, there was another candidate design which looked pretty good as well. Why don't you start building that
Right.
out of timber?
Fantastic.
Why don't you
Yeah.
start
Okay.
building that out of wood, out of
Yeah.
cedar? When can you start? And literally that week it started.
Right. Yeah.
There's beautiful timber boat built over frames,
stunning.
the old school way.
Yes.
It all got sheathed in glass, epoxy, and fiberglass, inside and out. And essentially it's a composite boat, but it's got a wooden core. And yeah, I mean, we won the first regatta in that boat, which validated that was just after the pandemic when things started opening up. That validated the design tools and our approach with the rig and the sails, because we did everything different. We just believed in ourselves, didn't go with convention, went with our instincts and our experience, and thankfully most of the decisions we took have been right.
Yeah. But having a leader like like Morty to actually lead that and say, we're going to take some risks, we're going to do it differently.
That's it.
And we're all doing it. It's so important, and there's so many parallels. I'm sure he runs his businesses, and that's why he's successful ultimately. I think.
I'll tell you what, Rob, if I can just fast forward, and this was very, very cool, and I think a really important part of it all. So we won the world. We basically won every regatta we've done. 3 Lake Garda events in a row. It's a big event in the class every year, season opener sort of thing. Beautiful Lake Garda. We won the worlds in Oslo, in a place called Hanko, just south of Oslo, in 2022. And then this year we won the pre-worlds, which is one of the oldest trophies in sailing. It's called the Scandinavian Gold Cup. We won that in Porto-Cervo. And then for the worlds in Porto-Cervo, we encountered the conditions, unfortunately, that our boat is not suited to. And it's light winds, but not only light winds, it was a really bumpy sea. There was a big storm in the northern Med, and it sent down like a 2-meter swell down to us with no wind. And our boat just didn't like that. It is a lot of wetted surface area, and a huge amount of righting moment. And so the boat was just getting, was sort of a little bit like in JB's book about Australia too, initially downwind, they couldn't figure it out, you know. Anyway, we just didn't have the right tool for the job. And myself and the other crew, Rory Scott, you know, hugely successful sail designer, high intellect, you know, both of us sailing with Morty. And on so we won the first 2 races in a little bit of breeze. Next day was tough. And then the third day we had 2 19ths, you know, after 2 really nice starts, you know, so good preparation, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
A couple of great starts and just getting passed on both sides, you know, all the way around the racetrack. 2 19ths out of a fleet of about 23. And we sort of recovered by the end of the regatta. I think we came 6th or 7th. But at the low point, you know, it was tough. It was we're not really conditioned to accept that, you know, and just accept it with sort of grace, you know.
Right.
Your mind plays tricks on you. But Morty, this is what makes him such a great leader, is and he's as competitive as anyone, don't get me wrong, but he just said, lads, I'm really happy. We're sailing in, you know, this really tough day. Lads, I'm happy. Don't worry about it. You know, you guys did a good job today. We sailed the boat as best we could. I'm happy.
Yeah.
And I sort of looked at him and he said, yeah, you know, we made our decisions. I made my decisions.
Right.
We got what we wanted.
Yeah.
And we are where we are.
Yeah.
So chins up, you know, let's go and have a beer and have a nice meal and come back and work on it tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know?
Fantastic. That kind of leadership, isn't it? And you do remember those people who you know, who are like that, and that's you're motivated the next day to go, yeah, what it is. And as you said, the mind can play tricks on you because that's what it does. But to have someone who can bring you back, I think is so important. We talked about the pandemic a little bit. Did you? And we one of the things I wanted to ask you was about remote coaching as well, because I think you did a little bit of it, and it's become quite a big thing in the cycling world, mainly driven through the pandemic. And there's been a number of things. A number of cycling coaches I know work with people all around the world because they can get the data, which they couldn't get 5 years ago. You're going to have to be there. Is remote coaching for you? Are you doing much of it? Have you seen any growth in it from the sailing world?
Yeah, for sure, Rob. I mean, I was doing some of it this morning. You know, I'm working with a team that are preparing for the Olympic Games, actually, and they're in Lanzarote this week at a training camp with a bunch of other boats, nations, and we're on the phone, on the Zoom this morning, and you know, they send through the data every day, and I do a bit of analysis from this end and look at the photos, look at the video, and we check in. You know, so it's become a thing. You know, like you say, it's become a thing that where you can make a positive difference from you know, from not being there. It's always better to be there. Totally. Sure. It's, you know, absolutely. It's probably, I don't know, 5 or 10 times better to be there, but sometimes you can't be there, and the tools you have now are very good. You know, you do rely on a relationship. I think that's important, like an existing relationship. But yeah, and through the pandemic, yes, you know, we all had a bit more time and a bit more sort of bandwidth to think about, and not knowing what's ahead of us. You know, it's a crazy time, wasn't it? And that just sort of dislocation and stuff. And I did put quite a bit of time into it. And the thing was, Rob, that I was actually quite busy through the pandemic and even the early days, because there's a lot of sailors who were sitting around not able to go to work, or wanting to think about something positive, and thinking about the sailing. And I was actually getting quite a few messages a day of people asking questions about stuff, you know, mainly technical type stuff, or directional, you know, here's where I'm at with my sailing, you know, I've got this and this option, any thoughts, that sort of thing. So I was filling a lot of my days doing that, and I guess in one respect thinking, gee, this perhaps this could be monetized, as opposed to just being good bloke and
Good bloke,
and
that's
go
right.
back to these people, which I've always done actually.
Yes.
I do like that. I like helping people. That's always, I
Yeah.
think it's been a bit of a character trait through my life with sailing. Like giving back. I see it as my duty in a way, give a bit back, and so yeah, looked into various tools and methods and stuff to be totally remote. Where
Right.
someone just sends something in and you deal with it with some tools, some animations, and send it back to them.
Yeah.
Perhaps that could be a thing. Thankfully, post-pandemic, got busy and don't have the space for that. But it's something that I do, quite a lot now with teams I work with.
Well, maybe the cycling could be an interesting sport to have a look at in terms of how that's progressed, because it has progressed quite well globally in terms of remote. I do think they collect data really easily, and you just have devices and things which something you're not allowed to carry on a yacht when you're racing, some yachts anyway. But so data is critical.
The problem with sailing data, Rob, and I think that's where people sort of go down this path of buying instruments, buying sensors, and so on, and sort of hoping that will make a big difference for them. Unfortunately, in sailing, it's that Mother Nature aspect, whereby no day is the same.
Yes.
And that really screws around with the data and conclusions. And really so much of it, we need a datum baseline. Anyone in any industry or sport, whatever, you need a datum baseline, and for us it's wind. It's wind speed. Wind speed then controls everything. But one thing the instruments don't know is, so the wind. So what I mean is the wind speed then sets a target speed and angle for the yacht.
Yeah.
These naval architects come up with polars. We call them polars, that are performance prediction programs. And let's say in 15 knots of wind, the boat should go 6.6 knots at 37 degrees from the wind, sailing upwind on, attack. The only problem is the data doesn't know, the sensors don't know how big the waves are.
Yeah.
They don't know the angle of the waves to the wind. So it's asymmetric tack to tack. You have waves in your face on one tack and across the boat on the other. It doesn't know the density of the wind. So on a nice warm kind of sea breezy day down there in Melbourne, 15 knots is a lot softer than, if I go out today on the Solent in the middle of winter. It's the same wind speed, but a different density. So it's a different level of force on the sail. So it's sort of, people can go a little down the rabbit hole of expecting answers. So it is one area I'm always very careful of and mindful of.
Yeah, and that's why being there, I guess, is so important. To be on the rib or seeing the conditions. So what's up for you this year? What are the big things going forward for you?
This year, so busy year, Rob. My year was already pretty full, and I got a call in December from a couple of young Germans sailing in the NACRA 17 catamaran class, and they're campaigning towards the Olympics in Paris, which will be sailed in the northern Med, a place called Marseille, southern France, and they had just lost their coach. Basically, their coach had taken another opportunity, and it was interesting. My initial knee-jerk response was, look, love to help, but I'm already pretty full. But then thought about it, and they weren't having a lot of luck getting someone that really was a fit for them. And they did a bit of homework. I did a bit of homework. We came back together again a couple of weeks later, looked at schedules, and I made some adjustments, and thankfully got sort of released, so to speak, by a couple of long-term clients for the year. So, and I was really attracted to wanting to make it happen. You know, it's back into this Olympic world of sort of being the very best you can be with no excuses, and being around young people. And
not a long runway, is there, too? I mean, it's not far away.
It's a really short runway, which also was an attraction for me as well.
Right.
Get in, hopefully make a difference, and let's see what happens, sort of thing.
And by the way, this crew I think did well in Tokyo. Is that right?
They did. They won a bronze medal in Tokyo.
Wow,
they are very, very, very good.
Excellent.
And you know, they have higher aspirations this time round. Naturally enough, they're two lovely young people who have given their lives to this. You know, and they're basically, both of them since they were like 16 years old. So for the skipper, it's been 11 years.
It's a long time, isn't it? It's a grind.
For the crew, it's been 7 years. You know, so it's very inspiring. Enjoying working with the Germans very much. And I also have a 6 Metre campaign going on where I'm the coach and kind of helping to manage a team, which is 2 boats, one owner, 2 boats, but one team. And they're all Spanish. I'm the only English speaker on that program. So it's a little tough for me. I don't speak German or Spanish. Or
there's
English,
a lot of people.
really.
There's a lot of people that teach you to swear too, isn't it? It's part of your program.
So, no, that's super nice. And then I've got Etchells going on at the moment. Fantastic. Miami winter series every year with Peter Duncan. 5 trips to Miami through the UK winter. It's fantastic.
Fantastic.
And then 5.5s and TP52s and an RC44. And
wow. What a great year. Hey, now look, you've got a great website and you write a blog as well. What's the website? How can people follow you and find out more about you?
Yeah, no, nice one. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, the website came about again through the pandemic, and a great friend of mine helping me put all that together and get a few products up there, and it's somewhere I do value kind of putting information out there for people. As I say, I like to give back and so on. So it's www.sailing.dog is the website, and there's an area there, Dogs Blog. Well, we'll put that in the show notes as well, so everyone can have a look at that. Hey mate, it's been fantastic catching up. You and I could speak another 3 hours, I think, chatting away. It's been great to catch you. It's been a long time since we've actually spoken to each other, even though, albeit we're doing it over Zoom. But thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Hey Rob, huge respect for you, mate, with all you've achieved in your journey as well. Really, really nice to catch up.
Great. Thanks, mate. Beautiful. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the It's All Possible podcast. You can contact me at rob@robhartnett.com or my website, robhartnett.com, or on LinkedIn. Remember to check out the previous seasons and episodes of the podcast and the show notes for more details on this episode's guest. For more inspiration, remember to check out the It's All Possibility playlist on Spotify, which contains a collection of upbeat, positive music I use for inspiration in my live performances. Until next time, live with passion and a perspective of possibility.